Welcome to Cattle Connect, your insight into Alabama's beef cattle industry. I'm your host, Reid McGuire, and this is Cattle Connect, brought to you by the Alabama Cattlemen's Association. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Cattle Connect podcast. I'm joined today by a familiar face to cattle producers here in Alabama. Kent Stanford is an associate extension professor with Alabama Cooperative Extension. He has a wide range of expertise, everything from chicken litter to forages to today's topic, heifer selection and development. Welcome, Kent.
Thanks. Glad to be here today.
So, Kent, for those that maybe aren't familiar with you, could you tell us a little bit about your background and your current role with Extension?
Sure. My role has evolved quite a bit over the years. I started out as a county extension agent doing ag and 4-H work in St. Clair, and I've been a regional livestock and forages agent and currently serve as an extension specialist with statewide responsibility, primarily in the area of nutrient management and everything that encompasses that.
Yeah, great. So today's topic is something that I know you have some experience with and have heard you give a lot of great talks on it about replacement heifer selection and development. So just to kind of to set the table for the conversation, can you tell us why is it important to get that right? Why is it important to select females that are going to be the future of our herd?
Well, obviously there's a significant economic impact that we have to consider, and the cost of development of heifers is very significant as well. But then from the long-term perspective, obviously we want her to be productive in the herd for a long time, to have some longevity built in so that she is productive. And when I say productive, not just bringing in heavy calves to the weaning pen, but I mean productive in terms of actually getting bred every year, so there's a fertility component of that, and then that she will continue to do that for a long time. And so I think it's important that we understand that on the front end, and then we develop whatever our program is and however we tailor that for our own farm to find those kind of heifers that fit with our production system there.
Yeah, so right now we're kind of in a period of contraction in the nation's cow herd, and there's probably not a lot of people that have expansion on their mind. But when we talk about those that maybe do, or when we use the term even replacement heifers, how do we know if we need to keep any heifers, and if so, how many? How would we kind of determine that?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think that's a number that probably fluctuates some from year to year. And as you talk about there, Reid, some of what we have to consider is where we are in the cattle cycle. You know, what can we sell those animals for off the farm right now? What kind of income could they create for us today versus hanging on to them and then over the long term thinking about how that fits into our system there. So I think one of those considerations would be just to find a simple number and say that about 10% of the cow herd needs to be replaced each year. Maybe that's an average sort of number, and that's the number that kind of works for us individually. So if you think about a typical 30 cow herd in the state of Alabama, that's 3 head, right? And so if we think about that as maybe a baseline in those years where the cattle are a bit cheaper and maybe we don't have as much opportunity to sell for maybe a higher price, maybe we keep a few more heifers when the market's down a little bit. And then in these years like we're experiencing right now where the prices are high, maybe we cut back a little bit. You know, it just kind of depends on your situation. Part of that is the cash flow consideration, and some guys are struggling with cash flow right now. Matter of fact, a lot of people are with inflation and the high cost of all of our inputs. So it's really a decision that you have to make each year on what's the right number for you.
Great. So when we get into some of the development stuff later on, but just kind of starting out, what would be some things you talked about, what kind of the role of the female is in the herd? What would be some things we would look at phenotypically in heifers would make kind of an ideal replacement?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I have learned over the years is there's no ideal animal. The ideal animal only exists in our minds. And so if you and I are both looking at the same heifer, we have different preferences, things that we're looking at. And so I think that understanding and knowing what it is that you appreciate and what you value and what you're looking for in your own animals is very important. So as you do that, you know, I kind of rank things in an order that makes sense to me. Structure is number one in the breeding animals. They got to be able to walk. That's as simple as I know to describe it. And so we need these animals that have the right structure. They need to have their feet and leg structure correct or as close to correct as possible. That's their only shock absorbers, so they've got to be able to walk around, eat some of this low-quality grass that we have in the southeast, and then have enough guts to be able to have the capacity that it takes to take that lower quality forage in and be able to utilize the nutrients in that. So structure number one, some volume and capacity, if you want to call it that, kind of number two for me. I think on the female side of things, they got to have enough muscle. They don't have to blow me away with muscle. We can add muscle on the bull side of the equation. But from the female side, they need enough. And a little extra is good, but they certainly have to have enough. And then finally, from a brood cow perspective, and not talking about show ring side of things, but they kind of need to look good doing it. So there needs to be some femininity and some attractiveness to them. But that may not be the number one thing we're evaluating.
Yeah, and so we're talking about a 2-year time frame before they have that first calf. So how often would you say that producers need to look at their heifers, look for some of those things you talked about, and maybe identify problems and pull them out? I mean, how often would you say they need to be thinking about that?
It's an absolutely great question, and the way that I would describe it or talk about it is kind of like this, Reid. If we start at the weaning pen, if you're retaining your own replacement heifers, and we start at that weaning pen, and we kind of make an initial sort, you kind of know what you like, what you've seen on those heifers when they're still nursing the cow, and then we get them in the pen, and maybe we have a chance to kind of group them up a little bit and pull off the ones that we really think that we want. Start with a bigger number than that 3 that we talked about before. And then over the course of that development time, and when I say the development time, primarily I'm talking about from weaning through breeding. All right, so that maybe is the window of opportunity. And if we say that's 150 to 200 days, something like that, we get that opportunity to kind of evaluate them a little closer, see what's going on, and during that development phase, if we see one that maybe has an attitude problem that we need to identify, and so she gets gone pretty quickly. If some of them start to develop some feet and leg problems, we can go ahead and pull those off. So I think 2 or 3 times during that development phase, it makes a lot of logical sense to maybe sort through them and cull as you need to. And then as we get to pre-breeding, and maybe we're doing a pre-breeding exam, that's another opportunity for us to maybe cull some of those lower performers out.
Save the date. The 82nd Annual ACA Convention and Trade Show will be here before you know it. Join us in the heart of Birmingham, February 21st through 22nd, 2025. Be on the lookout for more information coming soon.
So kind of switching into the development phase that you talked about post-weaning, is there anything pre-weaning that producers need to think about just to kind of set those heifers up for success?
Yeah, I think one of the questions that we frequently get is whether or not to creep feed. It's a really good question, I think, and a lot of guys have to evaluate whether it works for them. If they're not able to separate their heifer pairs versus the steer pairs, they're all going to be given the same opportunity to go in and take advantage of that creep feed, that creep option. Sometimes those heifers might get a little fatter than we would ideally like for them to be coming off the cow. Now, that just tells me that she's got the propensity for growth, and so we're seeing that potential truly realized there. But I think coming off the cow, then you can start to get an idea about, does she have any feet and leg problems at this point? Does she have enough muscle? Does she have enough guts? Is she coming off at a weight that is a good solid weight? Is that cow weaning at least 50% of her mature weight? We can evaluate some of those performance measures at that point at the weaning time. And then as we go into that development phase, and from weaning through breeding, we start to change up things a little bit, and maybe we have a bit more control in terms of the nutrition on those, and we can start to really pay attention on the nutrition side. I have to realize with heifers and really with that word development, the key is that we're trying to be intentional. We want them on an upward plane of nutrition. We want them continuing to grow, but we're not feeding them out and getting them over-conditioned and over-fat. We truly want to develop them, to give that frame time to grow, for their bodies to be able to mature as they need to. And so in terms of growth, we're only looking for 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds a gain during that timeline. I think a lot of people feel like they need to maybe be competitive with their steer mates, or if we're in a purebred setting, with the bull mates, but that's not the case. We need steady growth, but we're not trying to push them too terribly hard.
Yeah, so that's a great transition into once we've got those heifers weaned, and talking about nutrition really seems like it's one of, if the not most important pieces of the deal. What are some kind of pieces of advice you would give? You talked about that kind of steady 1.5 pounds a gain a day. What would be some things producers would need to do to achieve that?
Yeah, I think the first is to think ahead and be prepared. You know that you're going to wean them. You have a rough idea about when you're going to wean them, and you need to be prepared once the weaning time is over and you've kind of got the ball out of them, what's going to happen next, okay? We've got them out of the weaning trap, maybe out of the weaning pen. Do we have some grass that we can get them on? Have we intentionally stockpiled some grass for them? Maybe for those fall-born calves that have kind of been weaned for a while now and are ready to kind of hit some grass and go. I know that we're in a drought, but they still got to have something to eat, and so maybe we think about maybe some short-term times that we can supplement before we get on to some higher quality winter grazing. But primarily the point would be to be organized, know what you're going to do. And so let's just say right now we're sitting here the first week of September. Everybody's kind of in a dried up situation and burn up situation, and maybe not a whole lot of grass. So you may be in a situation right now with those heifers where you've got to feed some hay. Obviously, I would tell you that you need to have sampled that hay and know exactly what you have in terms of quality, and then you can figure out on the supplement side how much you need to supplement to make up for that lack of quality, maybe on some of that lower quality hay that we're forced to feed. And if you're lucky enough to have some grass, some of this summertime, this warm season grass, it's kind of overly mature and we're kind of at the end of the growing season and it's not doing a whole lot, take advantage of it, use it, but just realize that maybe you need to step up your game on the supplement side a little bit. And a lot of people say, well, how much should I be supplementing? What should I be using? There's lots of options on what you might feed, but generally speaking, 1 to 2% of body weight is kind of a range of what we need to be thinking about in pounds of feed per head on a daily basis. I really think probably 1.5% of body weight up to 2% of body weight is where a lot of people need to be.
All right, so once we get later on in the development phase and we're getting up to time to breed those heifers, some folks will synchronize, some won't. Could you talk a little bit about synchronization? Is that something that you should do on heifers? What are the pros and cons?
Yeah, I'm a fan of it. I think it's a real option. I think it's one that pays for itself. I really like the way that it tightens up that group and gives you that opportunity to start them out in terms of fertility over their lifetime with their mates in a powerful way. And if we can tighten them up through a sync protocol, and we may not even AI, I know people that do that. They do a different protocol sometimes or use some different products, and they say, I just don't have the expertise to breed, or I'm not going to AI, I'm just going to turn out extra bull power. I think that's even an option as well. But those protocols are there and they're very effective, and we're very fortunate in our state to have plenty of folks around that are very familiar with that, some of our industry partners in that do a really nice job in helping producers out. So we've got resources, and that's the big thing, is people need to find out what those resources are, what they can offer, start to have an idea about what that's going to cost. And so let's just throw a number out there that maybe it's $60 that you might have wrapped up in the cost of the sync protocol, as well as the semen to breed with, and maybe even a technician to come out and do some of that breeding. But it's a real opportunity to tighten those up and get them bred, within a couple of days of each other, and I think it's a very wise decision to do so.
Yeah, and then so with those heifers, we make one attempt to get them bred. Some will stick, some won't. How long should we kind of chase that? How many chances should we give them? Where should we kind of draw the line on that? I think that's kind of where the biggest rub for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think, and it's a good way to describe it. I think that is something that guys kind of struggle with, like how many opportunities am I going to give her? And realize that can be quite different between maybe a small purebred guy, a larger purebred guy versus a commercial guy. Commercial guy may say, hey, look, we're going to breed them one time. Maybe we're time breeding all of them, and they get that chance, and that's it. And that's fine. I understand the labor component of that and not having to get these up, twice a day over multiple days and then come back, in a few weeks and do it again. So it's kind of a personal decision or a farm decision, I think, on how often you want to chase that. But I think that if you're just going to breed on them one time, that it's certainly worth it to do that. if you give them one chance to settle to the AI date. And then depending upon your own setup and your own situation, you may want to follow up from that. And there's options. There's things you can do as a follow-up to that. Some of these patches that folks use, the Estrotec patches and things like that you can slap on that tail head, once you're done breeding or a few days after breeding even, if you slap that on to see what comes back in heat. If you wanted that additional opportunity to breed, give them that second chance to settle to the AI. But part of that consideration would be, if we're putting some selection pressure on fertility, which ones are maybe a bit more fertile and which ones do get settled to the AI. It's just another data piece that we can use in our selections moving forward.
Sale season has arrived. Check out the who, what, when, and where for cattle sales happening across Alabama by grabbing your most recent edition of the Alabama Cattleman magazine or at bamabeef.org/events.
And so for some of those heifers that didn't settle or we have trouble, I mean, you mentioned the genetic component. And then also breeding soundness exam, that's, common practice on bulls. Is there anything equivalent to that we can do on heifers?
Absolutely, and I think it's low-hanging fruit. It's not hard to do. Now, some people say, well, I don't have a good vet close by, or I don't have a large animal vet that can do this. They're out there, and they may have to drive a little further, and you might have to schedule a little further in advance. But a breeding evaluation, if you will, on the heifers is an awful good thing to do and not terribly hard. So some of the components to that would be we can take a pelvic area measurement. Not hard to do. That's a really, really useful piece of data so that we get an idea about how much actual space there is in that pelvis. And we can select those heifers that have maybe a bit more desirable pelvic area, or more importantly, we're able to get rid of those that don't have enough space. And we can start to identify those that maybe are a bit too narrow, and then maybe they don't make the cut. I think the second piece to that, though, is when we do a track score, repro track score. And this takes an experienced person. This is not something that a novice can do. You've got to have that skill set. And so when you go in and do that track score, we're trying to get an idea about the maturity there. Have they been through puberty? Have they been through a cycle? Are there structures there on the ovaries that we can palpate? And so I think that's an extra piece that certainly gives us a better understanding and an idea of her maturity.
Yeah, that's all great stuff that probably doesn't get talked about enough. But like you said, low-hanging fruit and definitely an opportunity to try and up your conception, I think. One thing that I've heard you in talks before say that I really liked is that the goal is not to get a bred heifer. The goal is to get a 3-year-old pair. So to get to that point, we've got those heifers bred. Once they calve, what are some things that you need to do to get those, 2-year-old pairs set up for success to get bred back with a calf on them?
Yeah, and I think that's something that maybe a lot of people let that slide a little bit, and ultimately that should be our goal, is to have that 3-year-old pair. So once she calves as a 2-year-old or at 23 months, however you're set up, between that time and when we're trying to get her settled back, we have to realize the nutritional demands that she has at that point. And what happens, really, the best way to describe it is about the time we need to be breeding her back so that she stays on that year calving interval. That's the highest time in her whole entire life. Her highest nutritional demand is when we're trying to get her settled back, because she's nursing a calf, she's still growing, she's got her own maintenance needs, and then we are adding the fertility piece as well. Well, fertility doesn't become number one on that list of priorities. It's the last on that list. And so if we really think about that timeline, we've got to focus on that proper nutrition. We've got to get enough energy in her. And a lot of folks get fired up about protein, but energy's where it's at, and we got to get that energy in her so that she can have the amount of condition that she needs. Fat equals condition, and fat is what triggers her body to cycle. She needs to be at least a body condition score 5, and I'd love for her to be in a 6. But generally speaking, we say a lot of times what you experience is they're going to lose a full body condition score after calving. Well, if she starts at a 6 and she drops to a 5, we still have a chance to get her bred. But if she's a little underconditioned, a little thin, and maybe she's a 5, at calving, and then she drops to a 4, then we've decreased our chances of getting her settled back, and that's what we have to avoid.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of great information that you've given us today, Kent, and covered a lot of ground. But if there's anybody listening to this that maybe wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can look on our website at aces.edu, and you can look for my name on there as well. If you're looking for beef cattle or forage information on that ACES website, you can just type in beef cattle or forages or Kent Stanford there, and we can get in touch with you.
So before we go, Kent, give our listeners 3 timely pieces of information that they need to know.
Yeah, I think one thing is, even though we've talked a little bit about the dry weather and the drought that we're in, it looks like we might have a system moving in with some decent rainfall in the coming days. And so I know a lot of folks are excited about getting some winter grazing in the ground. So I'd encourage you to make plans on getting some seed in the ground in the coming days as this weather pattern hopefully changes and you have that opportunity to establish some winter grazing. And just realize, man, that winter grazing, that's the good stuff. That's the ice cream bite. That's the kind of stuff that can really make a difference on your operation. And so if you need some help trying to figure out what to plant and what some of the options might be, you can go to Alabama Forages and be able to get some more information about some of those options there as well.
And for our younger listeners, we will have the second of our Junior Cattlemen's Field Days on September 25th. This will be centered around kind of a judging clinic, so identical program to what we've done in South Alabama on the 11th. You can go to bamabeef.org/field day for the registration and information for that.
All right, and one other thing, Reid, I'll throw out there. We've got a field day coming up at the Black Belt Research and Extension Center on October 18th. The registration is open there. And again, you can go on our extension website at www.aces.edu and search for that under events. You can also reach out to Josh Elmore. For those of you that are familiar with Josh, he'll be hosting that again October 18th at the Black Belt Research and Extension Center in Marion Junction, Alabama.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cattle Connect, brought to you by the Alabama Cattlemen's Association. Be sure to subscribe to get notified when our next episode goes live. Until next time, remember, beef, it's what's for dinner.